Hi, this is Karen Perkins, and this is a getting started guide for Adobe Audition CC. After you launch Adobe Audition, you will be presented with this Adobe Audition screen. We're going to talk about recording audio in the waveform view, and then we'll also take a look at the multi-track view and talk about how to edit audio that's recorded as well as adding sound effects and music in the multi-track view. We're going to start first by recording a voiceover track. We'll work in the waveform, not the multi-track first, but in order to get started, you're going to click File, New, Audio File, and we're just going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it Karen Voiceover. We're going to leave the settings at their default. We'll use a 48,000 hertz sample rate, which is great for video. You could drop down to 44,100 if you're just doing audio, but we're going to leave it at 48,000. We're going to record in stereo. Mono is fine for voiceovers, but if you're going to have music, you want to have stereo enabled, so we'll leave that defaulted there, and then we're going to leave 32 float as the default bit depth, and we'll click OK. Now your view will look something like this. You have your controls down here at the bottom. If you hover over the controls, the mouse trails will show you what those options will do. You've got your play, your rewind, your fast forward, and you also have your record. And this will start recording the audio track using whatever your audio input is set to. So let's take a look at that first. If you click on Adobe Audition and Preferences, and then Audio Hardware, or if you're using a PC, if you click on your settings and then go to your audio hardware, you'll see that you have a default input. In this case, I'm using the microphone on the PC as my input, and then you have your default output, which I'm using the speakers on the MacBook. If you're plugging in an external microphone like a Yeti mic, then you want to make sure that you're using that as your default input. And so select the input that you want to use and click OK. And now we're ready to record. So I'll hit the record button, and I'm going to use a portion of the Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I've pressed the stop button, and now I have our audio recorded. If you press play or the space bar, now you can play that back, and if your audio output is set up correctly, you should hear that. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this. So we have this recorded at somewhere between -3 and -6. That's kind of where it's averaging out there, and that's a good recording level. But if it's a little too quiet or a little too loud, you can use this volume heads up display and hover over the dial in the center there and press your mouse and drag up or down to adjust your volume. A quick way to do that is also to go to your favorites menu, normalize to -0.1 dB, and that will set your waveform to the maximum volume that it can be for your audio recording. So that's the basic audio recording components. Before we move into multi-track view, I'm going to zoom back in and have the entire track showing. There are a few other things I want to bring your attention to. If you click on effects, there are a lot of amplification, compression effects, delay and echo, modulation, a couple of really nice ones in here, and I'll just show you how they work. If you select your entire track using Command A or Control A, you will apply these effects to your entire track, or you can apply the effects just to a section. Under modulation, I'm going to go into chorus, and I'm going to select acoustic duet. I'm not going to worry about any of the advanced features, and I'm just going to click apply. This effect, when played on this continent, a new nation, conceived in liberty, now sounds like there's multiple voices. If I want to remove an effect, Control Z or Command Z will take that back off on this continent. And then you can also apply an effect like echo. And again, I'm just going to select the spooky echo and apply. And now if you play that, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. So there's a lot you can do with effects in the audio track. But remember that these are destructive, so any change you make to the base audio track here in waveform is going to be a permanent change, and unless you do a Command or Control Z and back that out. So now that we have a voiceover track recorded, we're going to switch over to multi-track view, and the same way we started our initial audio track, we're going to click File, New, Multi-track Session, this time instead of Audio File. And I'm going to give it a session name. I'm going to call this Karen Mix. Be sure that you're saving your files in an appropriate folder location where you can get back to everything. Again, file management is something I talk about in another session. We're not going to worry about template. We're going to use the same sample rate that we used for our audio track, which was 48,000. And we're going to use the same bit depth of 32 float, and we're going to mix in stereo. So go ahead and click OK, and we'll create our multi-track session. In the multi-track view, you actually have several tracks that you can work with. The recording that we just did is actually over here, the voiceover, and you can drag that in and place it on a track. And once you've placed it on a track, you can move it around in the track by clicking on it and dragging on it. You can also bring a track in from your File Explorer or Finder by clicking on that track and dragging it in and onto a track. If you get the message about the sample rate being different, you can simply click OK and it'll adjust the sample rate for that track. And so now I have an audio track underneath the video recording that I've created. In each track you have these triangles here, and you can drag the triangles and do a fade at the beginning and at the end of a track. You can adjust the zoom on the entire multi-track view by dragging out the end of the zoom tool up here. If you want to trim or clip an audio from the beginning or the end, just hover over the beginning or end of that audio track till you get this cursor, and then simply drag from there. I'm going to drag this back and then zoom in a little bit further so I can see it a little better and get this drug to the end. And then I'm going to use my fade here and fade out the music at the end. I can also adjust the volume on this second track, as the music is probably going to overpower the voiceover, and I can hover over the dial and drag the music volume down. I can adjust this volume while it's actually playing as well. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty. And get that at a volume that works with the track that I have. I'm going to zoom in again a little tighter so I can see more of the music. A couple of other volume options. I'm going to drag my fade back out. I'm going to move my start of my audio out a little further, and I'm going to click here about where I start talking, and I'm going to put a couple of points on my audio track, and I'm going to bring the audio down after I start to actually talk. And so what you'll have is a louder music at the beginning, and then it'll soften. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this. Just another way to control the volume on your audio track is with the points here on the actual audio track line. You have a few tools up here in the menu bar. Right now the move tool is selected, so when I click on something, I actually slide the entire track. So I'm going to Command Z. I'm going to click and select the time selection tool. I'm going to highlight just a particular area of the clip, and I can copy and then Control C or Command C, and I can paste and put that on a new track. I'm going to go back to the Move tool, and I'm going to place that right under where that was already said. And so now you actually have part of this audio doubled up. Our fathers brought. So that's just one of the things that you can do, and a way that you can use the different tools up here. There's also the razor tool, so you can split a track if you needed to, and then you can move just a portion of that track out. With the multi-track, you can actually add effects by track. So if you click on the effects rack, and I've got the first track selected here, I can drop the arrow down next to the first track, and I can add in a particular effect. I'm going to amplify the audio on the track, and as I'm doing that, if I play it while I'm doing it, I can adjust those settings as I'm playing. 407 years, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty. You can see how the effects work as you're actually playing through it. I'll close this window, and that'll keep that particular effect, this amplify effect here, on track 1. As I mentioned, the effects on the multi-track are non-destructive, so you can remove those effects without causing any changes to the base waveform. So I'm going to take that amplify effect back off. So another effect that is nice to add is a compressor. So I'm going to make sure I have my first track selected here, and then in my effects rack I have track effects selected. I'm going to drop down and select amplitude and compression, and I'm going to select a single band compressor. Now there's a lot of advanced settings here, but I think the more important thing is that as you actually play through the track, you can adjust these brought forth on this continent to a new nation, conceived in liberty, settings and dedicated to the proposition give you the sound that you want to have, are created equal. And then once you have those set, they're set for the track, and you can close this window. Again, I'll play that back one more time from the beginning. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition. So once you have that the way that you like it, then you can make any final adjustments that you need to, and now you're ready to export your audio for usage in your project or as a standalone. So a couple of things about saving. If I click File, Save, I'm going to be saving this multi-track session that I'm in. You can see that the session's not saved because it's got an asterisk at the end, so I can click File, Save, and that saves my multi-track session. I'm just going to click OK. Now you see that those have actually saved. If I want to mix this down and create an audio file that I can use outside of Adobe Audition, I'm going to select multi-track, and I'm going to mix down session to new file, and I'm going to select entire session. That way I'm getting all of the tracks in the session, and I click entire session, and now it actually is going to create a new WAV file of that mix down. Then if I want to save that as a file that I can use outside, I'm going to click File, Save As, and I'm going to leave it called Karen's Mix Down Wave. I'm going to put it where I know I want to use it, and then I'm going to select, instead of the WAV file, I'm going to select an MP3 audio. You can use WAV or MP3s, but I tend to like an MP3 audio file. And I'm going to leave everything else at its default, and I'm going to click OK. It's going to possibly give you a message that it's going to do some compression to it. That's fine, just click yes. And now you actually have an audio file that you can use. I've saved mine to my music folder, and so I have Karen Mix Down 1 here as an MP3 file, and I can use that in another project or as a standalone file.